He was walking along the edge of the rocky canyon, the evening sun casting long shadows across the ground. The air smelled faintly of burnt wood and dust from the settlement nearby. He had always liked these quiet moments, away from the chatter of people and machines. It was during one of these walks that he first heard a soft, almost pitiful sound that didn't belong to the usual animals in the area. At first, he thought it was a stray cat, or maybe a small wild animal caught in the rocks. But as he moved closer, the sound grew clearer, a tiny, desperate cry that tugged at something deep inside him. There, curled up in the shadows of a jagged stone, was a cub. It was small, no bigger than a loaf of bread, with fur that shimmered strangely in the sunlight. Its eyes were wide, bright, and strangely mesmerizing, like a tiny galaxy trapped inside them. The cub looked weak. Its ribs showed faintly under its fur, and its tiny body shivered with every movement. Something about it made him pause. People often ignored creatures like this, left them to fend for themselves, but he couldn't. There was a pull, an almost invisible thread connecting him to the cub. He knew that if he walked away, it would not survive the night. He slowly knelt beside it, trying not to scare it. The cub flinched at first, its small body trembling even more. Its ears flicked back, and it let out a soft hiss, a warning that it would fight if needed. But he stayed calm, speaking in low, gentle tones. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," he whispered. He reached out a hand, letting the cub sniff it, letting it decide if he was safe. After a long moment, the tiny creature leaned forward, its nose brushing against his fingers. He knew immediately that this was no ordinary animal. The way it looked at him, the way its tiny claws barely touched the ground as it moved, there was something different about it. People in the settlement would have called it alien or strange. He didn't care about labels. All he knew was that this cub needed him, and he couldn't leave it there. He scooped it up gently, careful not to hurt its fragile body. The cub let out a soft whimper, curling into him like it had finally found safety. The weight of it was surprisingly light, almost like holding a delicate piece of living starlight. As he carried it home, he could feel its tiny heartbeat, irregular and weak, but alive. That small rhythm was enough to make him promise that he would do everything to protect it. Back at his small home, he prepared a warm bed for the cub, using blankets and soft cloths. He made a small bowl of food, though he wasn't sure if the cub would eat. For hours, he simply sat with it, letting it adjust to the warmth and safety of its new home. The cub's eyes never left him, bright and curious, even in its exhaustion. The first night was the hardest. The cub cried constantly, and he found himself pacing the small room, unable to sleep. Every sound outside made it shiver. Every shadow made it tense. He whispered to it, telling stories about the world, about the small adventures he used to have, hoping to calm it. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cub began to settle. By morning, it was curled up in a tight ball, its tiny chest rising and falling more steadily. Over the next few days, he began to notice strange things. The cub's eyes seemed to follow him even in the dark, catching light in ways no ordinary animal could. Its tiny movements had a grace and precision that seemed almost unnatural. When it hissed or growled at the occasional insect that wandered too close, there was a power in its voice that made him pause. He didn't understand it yet, but he felt it. This creature, fragile as it seemed, had a strength inside it that was waiting to be awakened. Neighbors started to notice. Some came by, curious or worried, but most were wary. They whispered that he was foolish, that he shouldn't waste time on a strange, weak cub. "It's dangerous," one of them warned. "It's not a pet. Leave it alone." But he ignored them. Every day he saw the cub grow stronger. Every day it responded to his care. Each small improvement was a victory, a tentative step, a tiny purr, a soft, playful swipe. It wasn't just surviving. It was beginning to thrive. He spent hours observing it, learning its habits, understanding its moods. The cub would stretch in the sunlight, its fur shimmering like liquid silver, and he would marvel at its beauty. He would offer food and water, sometimes coaxing it gently with his hands, sometimes simply letting it explore its new environment. Slowly, a rhythm formed. The cub began to trust him, curling into his lap without fear, nudging him for attention, letting out soft, contented sounds when he scratched behind its ears. Despite the growing bond, he never let his guard down completely. He knew instinctively that this cub was not like the other animals he had cared for in his life. Its strength was hidden, and he felt it in small ways, how it reacted instantly to sudden movements, how it seemed to sense things before they happened. He had no idea what it could become, but he knew one thing for certain. He would be ready for it. Days turned into weeks, and the cub grew stronger and more confident. He named it quietly, not out loud, but in his thoughts. The name felt right, a word that captured both its fragility and its power. The cub responded to his presence more and more, often following him around the small home, curious about everything he did. Sometimes it would play clumsily with scraps of cloth. Other times it would simply sit and watch, as if understanding far more than any ordinary animal could. By the end of the first month, he could see a change. The cub was no longer the helpless, shivering creature he had found. Its eyes shone with intelligence, and its movements had a confidence that made him smile and worry at the same time. He understood that he was not just raising an animal. He was nurturing something extraordinary, something that could either be a great friend or a dangerous force if left unchecked. And so, each night, he would sit beside the cub, telling it stories and whispering promises of protection. Each day, he would watch it explore, play, and grow. He knew the road ahead would be long, filled with challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But in that moment, he felt a quiet certainty. Whatever this cub was destined to become, he would be there to guide it, to care for it, and to unlock the strength that lay within. The first chapter of their story had begun not just the story of a man and a cub, but the story of a bond that would grow to change both their lives forever. He looked down at the little creature, now curled up and sleeping peacefully in his hands, and whispered softly, "You'll be safe. I promise." For the first time since he had found it, the cub's chest rose and fell evenly, as if sensing the promise and answering it with trust. The journey had begun, and neither of them would ever be the same again. The days that followed were not easy. The cub, once small and helpless, began to show its true nature. Its tiny body, though still weak, was full of restless energy. It would explore every corner of the small home, sniffing, pawing, and occasionally knocking over whatever it could reach. The man had expected this. Wild creatures were curious by nature, but there was something different about this one. It seemed sharper, more aware than any ordinary animal he had seen. Its eyes seemed to study everything, taking in even the smallest movements. Even when he wasn't paying attention, feeding the cub became a challenge. It refused to eat some days, and other days it would eat with an intensity that surprised him. He experimented with different foods, trying to find what the creature liked. Some of the local animal's diet worked partially, but he noticed that the cub's energy only increased when he gave it certain foods: raw meat, fresh water, and small amounts of minerals he had found in the rocks nearby. He didn't fully understand why, but he knew instinctively that this creature was different and required careful attention. Sleep became a luxury he could barely afford. The cub cried through the nights, often pacing around the small room, restless and uneasy. He would sit beside it, holding it gently, whispering soft words, trying to calm it. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. There were nights when he thought he would never get rest, but he couldn't leave the creature to fend for itself. Its cries were not just noise. They carried a plea that he felt deep in his chest, a cry that demanded care, attention, and love. He noticed that the cub learned quickly. Every small action seemed deliberate. If he placed a toy or an object in front of it, it would inspect it carefully, touch it gently, and then retreat, watching his reaction. It was as if it wanted approval, as if it understood that its behavior mattered. He began to talk to it more often, giving commands in soft tones, not expecting much. Yet the cub would respond in subtle ways, a shift of its ears, a tilt of its head, a small step in the direction he suggested. These small victories gave him hope and made the sleepless nights feel worthwhile. The man also faced growing challenges from the settlement. People were curious at first, but soon their curiosity turned into suspicion and even fear. Some would whisper as they passed, warning him that the creature was unnatural, that it could bring danger. One evening, a neighbor came to his door, frowning. "Why do you waste your time on that thing? It's not like a pet. It's not normal. It's dangerous," the neighbor said. His voice sharp. The man didn't argue. He only shook his head and said quietly, "I'm not afraid. I see something in it that you don't, something worth protecting." The neighbor left, muttering under his breath, but the words didn't shake him. He had long since learned that caring for something extraordinary often meant ignoring the fears of ordinary minds. As the weeks passed, he discovered more about the cub's unique abilities. It was stronger than it looked, able to leap higher and land silently where most animals would stumble. Its claws, though tiny, could dig into the hardest surfaces, and it moved with a grace that reminded him of a predator in the wild, yet tempered with intelligence. The cub's senses were extraordinary. It could hear faint sounds far away, and its eyes seemed to notice movements that he himself didn't see. At first, these abilities scared him. He wondered what would happen if the cub grew too strong too fast, or if its instincts took over. But he also realized that these powers could be guided, shaped with care. He began small training sessions, gently encouraging it to follow his movements, rewarding calm behavior, and using patience when it acted impulsively. The cub responded, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with surprising eagerness. Each successful training moment felt like a step forward in a journey he didn't fully understand yet. There were moments of frustration. Of course, the cub could be stubborn, refusing to follow commands, growling when it felt challenged, scratching when it felt trapped. He never punished it harshly. Instead, he tried to understand why it behaved that way. Often, it was fear or confusion. He learned to read its signals, the flick of an ear, the twitch of a tail, the narrowing of its eyes, and he adapted his approach. Slowly, a language developed between them, a silent understanding that went beyond words. Evenings became their special time. After the chaos of the day, he would sit on the floor, letting the cub curl beside him. He would tell it stories, not just stories of the world around them, but stories of courage, survival, and trust. Sometimes he would read aloud from the books he kept in the small room. And though he didn't know if the cub understood the words, it listened attentively, occasionally tilting its head as if absorbing the meaning. In those moments, the bond between them deepened, unspoken, yet undeniable. The cub also began showing signs of playfulness. Its small body would pounce its shadows on the wall, chase moving dust particles, and sometimes even bring small objects to him as if offering gifts. These moments were rare but precious. They reminded him that this creature, for all its extraordinary abilities, still had the innocence of youth, the curiosity of a being just beginning to learn about the world. One afternoon, while exploring the edge of the settlement, the cub encountered a stray dog. The dog barked aggressively, circling the cub, expecting it to flee. But the cub stood its ground. Its small body tensed, eyes glowing faintly in the sun, and it let out a soft, low growl that made even the dog pause. The dog eventually backed down, retreating with a cautious glance. He watched quietly from a distance, pride swelling in his chest. The cub was learning to defend itself, to understand strength, but also to control it. He often wondered about the cub's origin. Where had it come from? Why was it abandoned? Its abilities were beyond anything known in their world. Some nights, he imagined distant galaxies, alien lands, and creatures unlike any he had ever seen. He didn't have answers, but he felt that one day the truth would reveal itself, and that when it did, the cub would be ready. Despite the challenges, life began to settle into a rhythm. The cub grew stronger, healthier, and more confident every day. It began sleeping longer, crying less, and even showing signs of affection rubbing against him, nuzzling his hands, purring in a soft, contented sound that was almost musical. These small moments of trust felt like triumphs, reminders that his care and patience were paying off. He also began noticing subtle changes in the cub's behavior. It seemed more aware of his moods, often approaching him when he was tired or upset, resting its head on his lap in silent comfort. Sometimes, when he felt uncertain or afraid, he would glance at the cub and find courage in its gaze. The bond was no longer one-sided. The cub had become a companion, a small but powerful presence that shared his world in ways he had never imagined. The settlement's skepticism didn't disappear, but it softened. Some people started to watch from afar, curious to see the progress. Occasionally, someone would comment on the cub's beauty or its unusual abilities, but most remained wary. He didn't mind. The world might not understand, but he did. That was enough. And through it all, he never stopped learning about the cub, never stopped watching, guiding, and nurturing it. Every day brought a new discovery, a new challenge, a new moment that strengthened their connection. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, filled with tests he could not yet imagine. But he also knew that together they could face anything. By the end of this period, the cub was no longer just a fragile creature in need of protection. It had begun to grow into something remarkable, a being of strength, intelligence, and grace. He could see glimpses of what it might become, though he did not yet understand its full potential. One thing was certain: their journey had only just begun, and the bond between them was the foundation upon which everything else would be built. Sitting quietly one evening, he watched the cub curl up beside him, its breathing slow and steady, its eyes half closed in trust and comfort. He placed a gentle hand on its head, feeling the warmth, the pulse of life, and the quiet strength that lay beneath. "We'll face everything together," he whispered almost to himself. "You and I will make it." And in that small, silent moment, the cub shifted slightly, pressing its tiny head into his hand as if acknowledging the promise. It was a simple gesture, but to him it spoke volumes. The journey had begun. They were no longer just a man and a cub. They were partners, companions, and a family in the truest sense. The struggle of survival had begun, but so had the adventure of trust, care, and the slow unfolding of extraordinary potential. And as he closed his eyes that night, listening to the faint, rhythmic breathing of the cub beside him, he knew that this was only the beginning of something far greater than either of them could yet imagine. As the days passed, the cub began to change in ways that startled him. It was no longer just a small, curious animal following him around. Its movements became more precise, almost deliberate, and there was a confidence in its step that had not been there before. One morning, while he was preparing a meal, the cub leapt onto the table with a speed so sudden that he nearly dropped the food. Its tiny claws made no sound on the surface, yet it had landed perfectly, balanced and steady, eyes glinting with something almost intelligent. At first, He thought it was just coincidence, perhaps luck. But then he noticed other signs. The cub could sense when he was about to move, predicting his actions before he even did them. It reacted to the slightest sounds, the smallest shifts of light, the tiniest vibrations in the ground. It was as if the world spoke to it in a way that he could not yet understand. The realization both thrilled and unnerved him. This was not a regular cub. It was something extraordinary. One afternoon, while they were outside near the cliffs, the cub's abilities became even more evident. A small rock tumbled toward him, kicked loose by the wind. He didn't even see it coming, but the cub pounced, catching the rock in midair with its tiny paws. He stared in disbelief. How could such a small creature perform an action so precise and quick? It was impossible. He began to understand that he had been raising something far more powerful than he had ever imagined. The cub's strength continued to grow. It could climb the steepest rocks without slipping, leap across gaps that he would never dare, and even move through water with a grace that amazed him. Its fur shimmered under the sunlight in ways that were almost magical, changing slightly with the angle of the light. Even its eyes seemed to hold a depth, a kind of awareness that went beyond ordinary understanding. Every day he observed it, he discovered something new, but with these powers came challenges. The cub could be wild and unpredictable. One moment it would curl up peacefully beside him. The next, it would roar or leap with a ferocity that made him step back in caution. He knew instinctively that these abilities needed guidance. Left unchecked, the cub could hurt itself or others. And so he began to train it, not with harsh commands, but with patience, observation, and understanding. Training was not easy. The cub resisted at first, testing boundaries, refusing to follow simple instructions. But he learned to read its moods, to notice the subtle signs that indicated when it was receptive and when it was not. He used gentle encouragement, rewards in the form of food or affection, and patience. Slowly, the cub began to respond. It started to understand commands, to follow simple instructions, to control its strength and speed. The process was slow, but every small success felt monumental. As the cub's powers became clearer, he realized that its abilities were not just physical. It had a strange intuition, a way of sensing things before they happened. He could stand in one corner of the room, and it would react to someone entering from another side, sometimes even before he saw them. Its eyes seemed to catch movements invisible to him, and it could track the faintest of sounds with ease. He began to call these awakenings, moments when the cub's natural gifts became undeniable. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep orange, the cub displayed a power that took his breath away. A strong gust of wind knocked over a stack of tools outside. Without thinking, the cub leapt into the air, claws extended, and caught each tool mid-fall, one by one, before they hit the ground. He stood frozen, staring in awe. The cub's eyes met his, almost as if it wanted him to understand, to acknowledge what had just happened. He knelt down slowly, reaching out a hand, and the cub nudged it gently, purring in a soft, proud sound. From that day, he realized that this creature, once a fragile, abandoned cub, was becoming a guardian of sorts. It had the potential to defend, to protect, and even to influence its surroundings in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. But he also knew that with this power came responsibility. He had to teach the cub restraint, to understand limits, to ensure that it would not become a danger in moments of fear or anger. Training sessions became a part of their daily routine. Each day he introduced small challenges, a jump to test balance, a chase to build speed, a task to test focus. The cub adapted quickly, learning from each attempt, correcting its mistakes, and gradually mastering every new skill. At night, he would reward it with quiet affection, letting it rest beside him, purring softly as if acknowledging his guidance. The bond between them grew stronger. The cub no longer saw him only as a caretaker. It trusted him, respected him, and even seemed to understand his emotions. If he was tired or worried, it would stay close, offering comfort with its presence. If he was alert and focused, it would mirror that intensity, ready for whatever challenge might come. He realized that the cub was not just learning from him. He was learning from the cub as well about patience, observation, and the quiet strength that comes from trust. As the cub grew, so did its curiosity. It began exploring beyond the small boundaries of the home, always returning, but sometimes bringing back small objects or pointing to things it had noticed. Its intelligence was apparent in the way it interacted with its surroundings, the way it tested limits, and the way it seemed to anticipate consequences before they occurred. He marveled at this every day, feeling a mix of pride and awe. But there were moments of danger, too. The cub's curiosity sometimes led it into risky situations. Once, it chased a small animal too close to the edge of a cliff, and he had to run to save it. Another time, it became startled by a sudden sound, and its strength could have caused damage to their small home. These incidents reminded him that training was not just about developing abilities, it was about instilling control, focus, and awareness. Despite these challenges, the joy of seeing the cub's growth far outweighed the difficulties. Every leap, every precise movement, every moment of trust felt like a victory. He would watch quietly, letting the cub explore and learn, occasionally offering guidance, but mostly allowing it to discover the world on its own terms. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience, observation, and intuition. The settlement continued to watch, sometimes with fear, sometimes with curiosity. Whispers spread about the unusual cub and the man who raised it. Some warned of danger, others expressed admiration. He paid little attention. He knew that outsiders could not understand the bond they shared or the potential that lay within the cub. All that mattered was their connection and the careful nurturing of its extraordinary abilities. Night times were moments of reflection. He would sit beside the cub, letting it curl into his lap or rest its head on his chest. He thought about the journey ahead, about the powers the cub had yet to reveal, and about the responsibility he bore. He did not feel fear. He felt determination. This was no longer just about care or survival. It was about guidance, trust, and the awakening of something beyond ordinary understanding. One night, as the stars shone bright in the sky, he realized something remarkable. The cub, which had once been small, fragile, and dependent, was now a creature of strength, intelligence, and presence. Its eyes reflected the cosmos, its movements were precise and deliberate, and its bond with him was unshakable. He understood that this was only the beginning. The cub's abilities would continue to grow, and so would the challenges. But he was ready. He whispered softly, almost as if speaking to the stars themselves, "You are more than you seem, and together we will face whatever comes." The cub responded with a gentle nudge, as if acknowledging the promise. In that moment, he felt an unspoken connection, a recognition that this journey was not just theirs. It was a story of trust, growth, and the unfolding of something extraordinary. The cub had begun to awaken, and with every day, its powers became more visible, more tangible, and more awe-inspiring. He knew the future would be filled with tests, both expected and unforeseen, but he also knew that together they could overcome anything. The first signs of true strength had appeared, and the journey to mastery was only beginning. And so they continued. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new discoveries. The cub, once helpless and abandoned, was awakening into a creature of incredible potential. And the man, once a solitary caretaker, was becoming a guide, a mentor, and a companion in a story that was far greater than either of them could yet imagine. The awakening had begun. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The cub, once small and timid, was growing faster than anyone could have imagined. Its fur shimmered brighter in the sunlight, and its eyes held a depth that seemed almost too wise for its age. The man noticed that the bond between them had changed. It was no longer just caretaker and cub. They were partners, companions, and friends. The cub had begun to anticipate his actions, following him quietly but purposefully, learning not just from what he said, but from what he did. One morning, as he prepared food in the small home, the cub appeared at the doorway, sitting silently, its tail flicking back and forth. He glanced up, and their eyes met. In that gaze, he saw trust, curiosity, and intelligence. The cub wasn't just reacting, it was observing, thinking, learning. It had begun to understand the rhythm of their life together, and he realized that this was the moment where training had shifted into true understanding. They spent hours outside every day. The cub explored the cliffs, the small forests, and the rocky paths near the settlement, often under his watchful eye. It was fearless now, moving with confidence and balance, yet it had learned caution. It would approach new creatures slowly, studying them, gauging whether they were dangerous or not. The man admired the careful way it assessed the world, the way its instincts were honed by guidance and patience. The cub's playfulness had evolved too. It no longer just pounced at shadows or chased objects. It started creating games, inventing challenges for itself, and sometimes even involving him. It would bring small rocks or sticks and drop them near him, nudging them with its nose as if inviting him to interact. He smiled at these moments, feeling the bond deepen. It wasn't just about care anymore. It was about mutual engagement, shared experiences, and learning from one another. But along with play came lessons. The cub's strength and intelligence were growing at an alarming rate, and the man knew that without discipline, this could become dangerous. He began teaching it control, not through punishment, but through guidance and patience. He would demonstrate actions slowly, repeating them, and rewarding the cub for mimicking or understanding. Sometimes it took hours to master a single task, but the cub never gave up. Its determination mirrored his own, and he felt proud and inspired by its persistence. One day, a sudden event tested the bond between them. A small fire broke out near the edge of the settlement, sparked by dry brush and wind. People were panicking, and the man rushed toward the danger. The cub, now fully grown compared to its early days, followed closely, its eyes scanning for threats. As they approached, the cub assessed the fire, then took a bold step forward, using its strength and speed to push falling debris out of the way. It was a moment of instinctive bravery, a demonstration of the trust and training they had shared. The neighbors, who had once whispered about the strange cub, were stunned. They watched as it moved with purpose, protecting both the man and nearby animals from harm. Its growls were low and commanding, warning even the bravest adults to stay back. For the first time, they saw the cub not as a strange creature, but as a guardian. He watched quietly, filled with pride and awe, knowing that this bond had transformed the cub into something extraordinary. Evenings became moments of reflection and closeness. The cub would rest beside him, leaning into his chest or curling its tail around his arm. He would speak softly, recounting the day's events, sharing thoughts, and sometimes just sitting in silence. The cub listened attentively, its breathing calm and steady, its eyes occasionally flicking toward him as if confirming understanding. These quiet moments strengthened their trust, creating an unspoken connection that words could not capture. The man began to notice subtle intelligence in the cub's actions. It could anticipate dangers, recognize patterns, and even respond to unspoken cues. When he moved to pick up a tool, the cub would often follow, understanding instinctively what he needed. When he hesitated or seemed unsure, the cub would stay close, offering presence and calm. It was as if the cub had developed a form of empathy, sensing his emotions and responding with awareness that their bond also extended beyond practical matters. The cub would occasionally nuzzle his hands, press its head against him, or sit quietly nearby when he was lost in thought. These gestures were small but meaningful, a reminder that trust and companionship were not just about survival. They were about connection. He realized that this creature, once helpless and abandoned, had become a true friend, offering loyalty and understanding that few humans could match. Training continued, evolving with the cub's growth. He introduced more complex tasks, testing both intelligence and control. The cub learned to respond to gestures, follow patterns, and even solve simple problems. It was remarkable to watch. Every day brought new discoveries about its abilities and potential. Yet for all its growing power, the cub remained attentive, patient, and connected to him. The balance between strength and trust had been achieved, and it was a bond that could not be broken. One particularly memorable day, the man tested the cub's judgment. He placed several objects at varying distances and asked the cub to retrieve them one by one. The cub analyzed each object, moving carefully, picking them up with precision, and returning them exactly where he had asked. It was a clear demonstration, not only of its intelligence, but of its willingness to work with him, to learn and cooperate. He couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come from the frightened, shivering cub he had first found. The cub's loyalty became more apparent during small challenges around the settlement. If someone approached with suspicious intent, the cub would position itself between them and him, growling softly but firmly. It had learned to distinguish threats from harmless visitors, to assess situations, and to act accordingly. This protective instinct, combined with its intelligence and growing abilities, made the man feel safer than he ever had in his life. The settlement began to accept, though cautiously, the extraordinary nature of the cub. People still whispered, but they also observed, and sometimes even admired its abilities. Some children would watch from a distance, amazed by the creature's speed and agility. A few adults came closer, testing its intelligence, and were often met with unexpected responses, curiosity, careful observation, and sometimes playful engagement. The cub had become a bridge between the ordinary world and something extraordinary, showing that intelligence, strength, and trust could coexist. He also began noticing changes in the cub's appearance. Its muscles were more defined, its fur shimmered more vividly, and its eyes glowed faintly in low light. The cub seemed aware of its own growing strength, moving with confidence and grace. Yet it remained humble in its interactions with him, never showing arrogance, always attentive, always responsive. This combination of power and loyalty was rare, and he cherished it deeply. As the bond strengthened, he also realized that the cub had begun to communicate in subtle ways. A tilt of the head, a flick of the tail, a particular sound all indicated understanding, agreement, or desire. They had developed their own language, unspoken but clear, a way to share intentions, warnings, and emotions. This silent communication deepened their connection, creating a relationship built not only on care, but on mutual understanding. A man spent many nights reflecting on the journey so far. He remembered the tiny, abandoned cub he had found, shivering and afraid, and compared it to the strong, intelligent, and loyal companion before him. It was impossible to imagine that the same creature had grown so much in such a short time. The bond they had formed was rare, something beyond ordinary understanding, a mix of trust, patience, guidance, and love. He realized that this bond had transformed them both. The cub had learned to trust, to control its abilities, and to understand the world around it. But he had also learned patience, empathy, and the quiet strength that comes from nurturing something extraordinary. Together, they had built something far greater than survival. They had built a connection that would last a lifetime, a partnership that would face challenges far beyond what either could imagine. Even in moments of rest, the cub stayed close. Its presence was comforting, grounding, and inspiring. He could feel its heartbeat, steady and strong, a reminder of the journey they had shared and the adventures yet to come. The cub had become more than a companion. It was a reflection of courage, growth, and the extraordinary potential hidden in even the smallest, most vulnerable creatures. And so life continued. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities to strengthen their bond. The cub's intelligence, strength, and loyalty continued to grow, as did the man's understanding of the responsibilities and joys of caring for such a remarkable creature. Together, they were no longer just a man and a cub. They were a team, a family, and a force that would face the world side by side. The bond was unbreakable, and the cub's transformation into a fearsome yet loyal companion was underway. He knew that the journey ahead would bring even greater challenges, but he was ready. They had proven that trust, patience, and guidance could turn even the most fragile and abandoned creature into something extraordinary. And with every day, that extraordinary potential grew stronger, waiting for the moment it would be fully realized. The day began like any other, with the sun rising slowly over the rocky hills surrounding the settlement. Birds chirped in the distance, and the wind carried the faint smell of earth and grass. He was preparing food outside while the cub watched carefully, alert as always. Its body had grown strong, muscles defined beneath its shimmering fur, and its eyes gleamed with intelligence and awareness. He had trained it well, nurtured it, and guided it, but neither of them knew that the day would bring the cub's first real test. A sudden noise broke the calm, a deep, vibrating hum that carried across the hills. At first, he thought it might be a vehicle, but the sound was too irregular, too heavy, too alive. Then he saw them, figures emerging from the distance, moving with precision, their shapes unlike anything he had seen before. They were aliens, members of a rogue faction that hunted rare creatures for their power. Their appearance sent a shiver down his spine, but he knew he had to act. Panic would only make things worse, and he could feel the cub tensing beside him, ready to respond. The cub's body moved instinctively. It crouched low to the ground, tail flicking back and forth, eyes focused. Its ears twitched, picking up sounds invisible to him. He realized that it was not just following him. It was assessing the situation, preparing for what was coming. He whispered softly, "Stay with me. We can handle this together." The cub let out a low growl, its body rigid, muscles ready to spring. The aliens approached with an aura of threat. Their movements were precise, their intent clear. They wanted to capture the cub. He felt a surge of fear, but he stood firm. The cub stepped slightly forward, placing itself between him and the invaders, its growl growing louder. The humans nearby froze, unsure of what was happening, while the man focused entirely on the creature he had raised. It was no longer a small cub. It was a force ready to protect, ready to defend. The first strike came quickly. One of the aliens lunged forward with a weapon designed to subdue, but the cub moved with astonishing speed, sidestepping the attack and knocking the alien off balance with a swift swipe of its paw. Its claws, sharp and precise, left marks in the metal armor of the invader, and the alien stumbled back, surprised by the strength and skill of what it assumed would be an easy target. The man could hardly believe his eyes. Every lesson, every training moment, every hour of patience had prepared the cub for this moment, and it was performing beyond anything he could have imagined. The cub's roar echoed across the hills, a deep, commanding sound that carried both warning and authority. It was not just noise, it was power. The other aliens paused, assessing the situation, but the cub did not hesitate. It leapt, claws extended, moving with precision and grace. It used its speed to outmaneuver them, striking when necessary, dodging attacks effortlessly. He watched, heart pounding, as the creature he had nurtured transformed into a guardian unlike any other. He stayed close, guiding the cub with subtle movements and words. "Left," he whispered. The cub responded instantly, shifting direction to block an alien advancing from that side. "Down," he said softly. The cub dropped low, avoiding a swinging weapon, then sprang back up to counterattack. Their movements became synchronized, almost like a dance. It was a bond of trust, built over months of care, training, and patience, now being tested under real danger. Despite the intensity of the situation, the man noticed the cub's control. It did not attack recklessly. Every movement was measured, deliberate, and precise. Its eyes tracked the alien's intentions, and it acted not out of anger, but out of calculation. It was clear that the creature had learned the importance of restraint, the value of strategy, and the need to protect without causing unnecessary harm. He felt a surge of pride and relief. The cub was ready for this moment, ready to face the real world beyond their home. The battle continued for several minutes, but it felt like hours. The aliens, skilled and dangerous, began to retreat as they realized that capturing the cub would not be easy. The cub's strength, speed, and intelligence were beyond their expectations. It moved with a combination of instinct and learned behavior, defending the man, the home, and itself. He could feel the energy, the power, the presence of a being that had once been small and abandoned, now fully awakened and formidable. At one point, an alien managed to corner the cub near a rocky ledge. Its muscles tensed, ready for action, and the man's heart skipped a beat. But instead of panicking, the cub assessed the situation, then leapt with precision, landing safely on a lower rock, maintaining balance and readiness. It was a display of both courage and intelligence, a reminder that the creature was not just strong, but aware, capable of thinking and acting with purpose. Finally, the aliens began to withdraw, recognizing the futility of their attack. The cub stood its ground, tail swishing, eyes glowing faintly as if signaling victory. The man approached slowly, placing a hand on its head. "You did it," he whispered, his voice filled with awe and relief. The cub nudged his hand gently, purring in a low, resonant sound. It was not just a sign of affection, it was acknowledgement, a way of saying, "We survived together." After the danger passed, he examined the area, ensuring no threats remained. The cub stayed close, alert but calm. He realized that this day had changed everything. The creature he had nurtured, trained, and protected had proven itself capable of defending not just itself, but him, the home, and the surrounding settlement. Its abilities were no longer a secret. They were a force, ready to face the challenges of a dangerous world. Neighbors, who had been watching from a distance, approached cautiously. They saw the cub, now fully grown, standing tall, eyes bright and powerful. They whispered among themselves, amazed at what they had witnessed. The man ignored their murmurs, focusing on the cub. He had known its potential all along, had trained it patiently, and had built a bond of trust that now shone for all to see. That night, the man and the cub sat quietly outside, the stars reflecting in the cub's eyes. He stroked its fur gently, feeling the warmth, strength, and presence of the creature beside him. "You are extraordinary," he whispered. "Not just strong, not just fast, but smart, loyal, and brave. You are more than I could have imagined." The cub responded with a soft nuzzle, leaning against him, a silent promise of loyalty and partnership. The attack had been a turning point. It had tested the cub's abilities, its courage, and its loyalty. It had shown that the months of care, training, and patience had prepared it for real challenges. More than that, it had shown that their bond was unbreakable, that no threat could separate them when they stood together. The cub had transformed from a fragile, abandoned creature into a powerful, aware, and fearless being. He spent the rest of the evening reflecting on what had happened. He thought about the journey they had taken from the day he found the tiny, shivering cub to this moment of triumph and awakening. Every challenge, every night of sleepless care, every lesson and game had contributed to this transformation. And yet, he knew that this was only the beginning. Greater challenges, more dangers, and even more extraordinary moments awaited them. The cub rested beside him, its breathing steady and calm, its presence a source of comfort and inspiration. He realized that it had not only grown in strength, but had also learned responsibility, control, and loyalty. It understood the weight of its abilities, the consequences of its actions, and the importance of trust. It was no longer just a creature in need of protection. It was a partner, a guardian, and a friend, capable of facing the unknown with courage and intelligence. As the night deepened, he looked up at the stars and imagined the journey ahead. He knew that their world was small, but beyond it, dangers and wonders awaited. The cub, now fearsome and aware, was ready to face whatever came next. And he, having nurtured, guided, and trusted in its growth, was ready to stand beside it. Together, they were unstoppable, a team forged through care, trust, and courage. The first true test had passed. The cub had faced danger, demonstrated its strength, and protected those it cared about. It had grown beyond the limits of a simple creature, stepping into the role of guardian and partner. And in that moment, the man knew that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together, as equals, as family. And as a force that could not be ignored. The world had seen the cub's fearsome potential. But he knew that the true journey was only beginning. There would be more tests, more challenges, and more adventures. But the cub was ready, and so was he. They had proven that care, patience, and trust could transform even the smallest, most abandoned creature into something extraordinary. And together, they would continue their journey, stronger than ever, facing the unknown with courage, intelligence, and loyalty. The days after the attack passed quietly, almost peacefully. The settlement returned to its usual rhythm, but he knew that life had changed for both him and the cub. That one test had revealed the cub's true potential, and he felt a quiet sense of awe every time he watched it move or listen, aware of the world around it. The cub had grown into something extraordinary, a being that combined intelligence, strength, and loyalty in ways that seemed almost magical. He spent the mornings teaching it new skills, refining what it already knew, and observing its reactions carefully. The cub had begun to anticipate his thoughts and movements in ways that amazed him. It could follow complex instructions, read subtle signals, and act with precision. He had never seen any creature learn so fast, and yet the cub retained a playful innocence that reminded him of the day he first found it. One morning, he decided to take the cub further into the hills, away from the settlement. He wanted to see how it would handle unfamiliar terrain and challenges. They walked for hours, crossing rocky paths, small streams, and steep cliffs. The cub moved with ease, navigating the terrain without hesitation. Its eyes scanned the environment constantly, alert for any signs of danger. Occasionally, it would pause and look back at him, as if to check that he was still there. He smiled at the gesture, feeling proud and deeply connected to this creature that had grown so much under his care. As they reached a wide plateau, the cub stopped suddenly, its body stiffening. He noticed the tension, the focus in its gaze, and realized that it had sensed something he could not. Ahead, in the distance, a strange light flickered, shifting across the rocks. He felt a mix of curiosity and unease. He whispered softly, "Be careful. Stay close." The cub pressed itself gently against his side. Acknowledging his words, and together they approached cautiously. When they arrived, they discovered a small alien machine, partially damaged and abandoned. It hummed faintly, lights blinking irregularly. He had no idea what it was for, but he could feel its energy, strange and unfamiliar. The cub circled it, sniffing and pawing at the edges, examining it with keen attention. Then, almost instinctively, it placed a paw on a control panel. The machine responded, lights shifting, small parts moving, as if recognizing the cub's presence. He realized in that moment that the cub's intelligence extended beyond its physical abilities. It could interact with technology, sense energy, and understand mechanisms that he himself struggled to comprehend. The discovery left him both amazed and cautious. The cub was no longer just a strong and intelligent creature. It was becoming something beyond ordinary understanding. Its abilities, once hidden and subtle, were now visible in ways that were undeniable. He knew that the next steps of their journey would require wisdom, careful planning, and trust. The cub had grown too powerful to be left unguided, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him more than ever. Over the next days, he focused on teaching the cub control and patience. He introduced challenges that required thought, careful observation, and precise action. The cub responded eagerly, showing signs of learning, not just commands, but strategies. It could solve puzzles, predict outcomes, and adjust its behavior with remarkable foresight. Each success strengthened their bond and prepared the cub for challenges that might come from outside their home at night. The cub would rest beside him, but it was rarely still. Its eyes would glow faintly in the dark, scanning the shadows, listening to sounds he could not hear. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night to find the cub sitting alert, its body tense, ready to respond to any threat. He realized that its instincts were now fully awakened, balanced by the intelligence and guidance he had provided. It had become not just a companion, but a protector, a being aware of its surroundings and capable of extraordinary feats. Then one evening, a distant signal reached the settlement. A group of alien hunters, larger and more dangerous than the last. They had heard of the cub, of its abilities, and now sought to claim it for their own purposes. The man could feel the tension in the air before anyone else realized what was coming. He looked at the cub, which had already noticed the approaching threat. Its eyes glowed faintly, muscles tensed, and it let out a low, steady growl. He knew they were ready. When the hunters arrived, the cub did not hesitate. It moved swiftly, positioning itself between him and the invaders. Its growl became a roar, a sound that echoed across the hills and carried a warning. They were not to be trifled with. The hunters approached cautiously, expecting an easy capture, but the cub's presence and power were undeniable. It moved with speed, agility, and precision, striking only when necessary, but always with impact. Its intelligence was clear in every action, predicting movements and countering attacks in ways that left even the most skilled hunters stunned that the man stayed close, guiding the cub subtly, offering encouragement and direction. They moved together as a team, instinct and intelligence aligned perfectly. The cub's abilities had grown to the point where it could protect itself, and him without hesitation. Yet it maintained control, restraint, and awareness. The battle was intense but brief. The hunters soon realized that the cub was not just a creature, but a force beyond their comprehension. One by one, they retreated, leaving the man and the cub victorious. After the danger had passed, the man knelt beside the cub, placing a hand on its head. "You've grown beyond what I imagined," he said softly. The cub nuzzled him gently, purring a sound filled with pride, trust, and affection. It had proven itself in every way: intelligence, strength, courage, and loyalty. He realized that the cub had fully transformed into the being he had always known it could become. The following days were quieter, yet filled with reflection. The cub explored its abilities further, testing its strength, intelligence, and instincts. It began to understand the boundaries of its power, moving with control and purpose. The man guided it with patience, offering challenges that pushed its limits without overwhelming it. Each success was celebrated. Each lesson learned reinforced the bond between them. Neighbors and others in the settlement began to see the cub not as a strange creature, but as something extraordinary. Its loyalty, intelligence, and strength were undeniable. Children watched from a distance, fascinated by its movements, while adults recognized its protective nature and wisdom. The cub had become a symbol of courage, trust, and the power of care. Over time, the cub began to develop traits that were almost mystical. Its eyes glowed brighter in low light. Its fur shimmered with unusual colors under the sun, and its presence commanded attention without effort. He realized that the cub was no longer just a trained animal. It was a force of nature, a creature capable of inspiring awe and respect. Yet, despite its power, it remained gentle and affectionate toward him, loyal beyond measure. One evening, sitting together on a hill overlooking the settlement, the man reflected on their journey. From the day he had found the tiny, abandoned cub to the moment it had defended him and the home against multiple threats, the transformation had been extraordinary. He realized that the bond they shared had not only shaped the cub, but had shaped him as well. Patience, care, and trust had unlocked potential in both of them, creating something unique, powerful, and unbreakable. The cub rested its head on his lap, its breathing calm and steady, and he whispered softly, "You are more than I ever imagined. You are strong, wise, and fearless. And together, we will face whatever comes." The cub responded with a gentle nudge, as if acknowledging the promise. He knew that whatever the future held, adventures, dangers, or wonders, they would face it together. A team stronger than any threat, bound by trust, care, and loyalty. In the days that followed, he continued guiding the cub, helping it explore new skills, refine its abilities, and understand its own power. The cub responded eagerly, learning faster than ever, and each day brought new discoveries. It had become more than a companion. It was a partner, a guardian, and a symbol of courage and resilience. The final transformation was complete. The cub had grown into a fearsome, intelligent, loyal, and controlled creature, capable of facing threats, solving problems, and protecting those it cared about. Its journey from abandoned cub to extraordinary being was a testament to the power of patience, love, and guidance. And as the sun set over the hills, casting long shadows across the land, he looked down at the cub, now fully grown and powerful, yet gentle and loyal. He smiled, knowing that their story had reached a remarkable point. The cub, once small and neglected, had become a guardian, a companion, and a force of nature. Together, they had faced challenges, overcome dangers, and built a bond stronger than anything else in the world. The journey had begun with a simple act of care, and it had led to something extraordinary, a partnership between a man and a being unlike any other, a story of trust, courage, and the awakening of a fearsome, loyal galactic creature. And though the future would hold unknown challenges, he knew that they would face it together, united, unshuckable, and unstoppable.